So, as many of you guys know, Ashes of Creation Phase 3 has been delayed again, this time until August 26th. Now, this isn't really a surprise to anybody that's been playing the PTR. I have been sort of consciously taking a break from Ashes of Creation to sort of recharge the battery in preparation for Phase 3. But let me tell you, I hopped on that PTR and it was rough. So I totally understand the delay. It's not that big of a delay. There are some people that are a little bit upset by this, mainly the folks that planned vacation or like life events around Phase 3 starting. I know I sound like Captain Hindsight, but obviously that is a terrible idea. I've always thought the meta strat in terms of planning vacation has always been to wait until the release date happens and then do it a little bit after that, because there's always going to be some technical problems with especially MMORPG releases. Very rarely do they go off without a hitch, so I've never been a launch day kind of guy anyway. So with that news, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Ashes of Creation Phase 3. Let's start off with the good, and there's a lot of good here. I am of the opinion that the start of Phase 3 is going to be a great time to jump in and play the game in general. If you're interested in Ashes of Creation, I think this is going to be a fun time to get in and play. The start of new MMORPGs, I know this is just a phase in testing, but it's always fun, right? If you're an MMORPG fan and you've got access to the game, I think it's just going to be a fun time to play. The servers are going to be up 24/7. This is great for people like me who have jobs and obligations outside of the game. It was always kind of a bummer to try and play on like Wednesday or Thursday and the servers will be down. This is also going to be the longest phase. There's not going to be a wipe until release. Again, this is what they've said. So my MMORPG testing brain, having tested a lot of these kind of games, I don't necessarily believe them, but we will see. Now, even if they don't do an official hard wipe, they may do a soft wipe, which is them raising the level cap. This is something they've talked about. Max level in Ashes of Creation is supposed to be level 50, and we've only ever gotten to level 25. So if they raise the level cap to 35 randomly, in a way that is kind of a wipe, because that means you have to re-gear, level up further. So there might not be a hard wipe, but there could be some little soft wipes. We also have some new weapons coming online this phase. We have the spear, the one-handed axe, the two-handed axe, the rapier. There may be something else I'm forgetting, but got some new weapons, new cosmetics. That's always fun. This is also going to be a very long testing phase, over a year at least. So we're actually going to get to see how the end game plays out with some of these economy-related things. Harvesting, crafting, processing. The economic game is actually going to matter because this phase is going to be long enough for people to actually care. With phase 2.5, nobody really cared to level up that kind of stuff or bother with that kind of stuff because it was so quick. Everybody knew it wasn't going to last very long. But this time, with it lasting over a year, I think people are going to care. And I'm really happy to see how this stuff plays out because it's kind of an element of the game we haven't truly experienced yet, because there's always been an asterisk where it's like, people don't really care that much because we know the wipe is coming soon. And this time, it's not going to be soon. Next thing that's good. Unfortunately, I can't show you, but the Anvil zone is very good. This is going to be a starter zone, so this may have gotten a bit more love than some of the other zones, but I'm hopeful in that this zone is as good as it is because their tools and their production pipelines are just better. So the newer stuff is going to be better, and hopefully they can juice up some of the areas in the other zones that aren't necessarily that great. But the Anvils, so far, seemingly pretty good. Next thing I'm really liking, the dynamic lawless POIs are looking to be pretty fun. This is something that you'll probably see me doing a lot in Phase 3. I'm sure these will have to be tuned and modified. I would love to see every zone get a lawless POI that's always there, like it's just a small little area. Think about like a lake, right? A little island on a lake that's got like a mob camp that's really lucrative, and it's always on PvP, but it's just that little island. The rest of the zone is PvE. I would love to see just little tiny lawless pockets that are always there, and they're small group oriented stuff. So I'm excited for dynamic lawless POIs. I think that could be cool. I'd like to see them get even more crazy with that and maybe have dynamic lawless POIs on low levels dungeons, but those dungeons get scaled up to max level. They could get really crazy with that. Also, let's not forget about the countless little things that have been getting polished and gotten better. Right now, we're sort of talking about the big ticket stuff that's obvious, but underneath the surface, there's lots of little UI widgets that are getting better, things like that don't necessarily, justify a bullet point, but there is a lot of stuff that has gotten better, especially if you haven't played since like phase 2. You're probably going to jump in and be like, oh wow, this little thing is better, this little thing is better. So let's not forget about the little stuff. And finally, the biggest thing that's good about phase 3 is the Nakua are finally available. You bet your ass I'm going to be playing a Nakua. All of my characters will be a Nakua. That's the race I've been looking forward to. I jumped in on the PTR. They are just as silly as I was expecting them to be. I am all for the Nakua race. Now let's get into the bad things. Despite all of the delays Ashes of Creation has had, there are still a lot of things we don't have. At this point, I think every single phase has been delayed. Phase 1, 2, and 3 have now gotten delayed, and that roadmap is still not even remotely close to being accurate. Now, I've never been a believer in the roadmap for any company whatsoever, especially not an MMORPG, but none of it is accurate. So it's not great, right? There are even like some hilarious Discord messages with Steven saying, oh, the Summoner might come in phase 2, and obviously not. So the delays are not great. The fact that certain things weren't ready on time is not great. I'm not going to hold them, this is in the bad section, not the ugly section. So it's not my favorite, but it's not the worst thing in the world. The next thing I don't love is that the crafting and harvesting are still going to have the same spin up time. If you played phase 2.5, you'll know what I mean, in that the game early on is going to be get to max level, farm bosses for drops. The crafting is not going to come online until probably a couple months down the road. It actually may come on a little faster because this phase is longer and people are going to be a little more invested in that kind of stuff. So maybe people will craft and build up the nodes a little faster than they would with phase 2.5 because nobody really cared about doing that. But that is still going to be a thing that takes a while. So the crafting and harvesting, you are still a slave to those journeyman workbenches. Those crafting benches are still going to hold everybody back. This isn't great, but this is a temporary problem that I don't think maybe this isn't even worth solving, because you got to think, this is probably the second to last time we're ever going to encounter this, because it's going to be this and then launch. And then after that, presumably every server is going to have these crafting benches up. Maybe some will get destroyed every now and then when something gets sieged, but we're not going to have this whole thing where the entire game is held back by the initial benches. That's only going to happen a couple times. But it is going to happen again, so not the greatest, but not the worst. And the final thing I don't love is that we are getting all of these cool new weapons, right? But in a way, these are kind of just cosmetics because the weapon tree is still incredibly lackluster. A lot of PvP-oriented players really don't even use their melee weapons that much. Even if you're a melee player, a lot of times you're leaning heavily on your ranged weapon for basic attacks. And these weapon trees just aren't that interesting. They only affect basic attacks, and a lot of those basic attack effects just aren't that impactful. I would love to see the weapon trees just be more interesting and make more of a difference. Like, it should really matter that I'm using a sword versus daggers on my rogue, right? You'd think, but it kind of doesn't. Now let's get into the downright ugly. Now I want to preface this segment by saying I love this game. I'm going to be playing Phase 3 a lot. I plan on making videos about Phase 3. I'm hoping that this is the MMORPG I play for the foreseeable future. But there are some ugly things with Ashes of Creation that are starting to show themselves. And the big thing is that the reality of this game's development is starting to show itself. Phase 3 is going to last for around a year. That's what they've said. But let's just say it lasts a year and a half, 50% longer than they're saying it's going to last. That is a lot of time. A lot can change in that amount of time. And I fully expect that this will be the most transformative period that Ashes of Creation goes through as a forward-facing game to the public. The game is going to change more in the public's perception now than it ever will. However, miracles are not going to happen. The rubber is starting to meet the road on what this game is going to be and what this game is not going to be. So let's talk about the core weaknesses of Ashes of Creation that I just don't see getting any better. The biggest weakness this game has is that the IP is incredibly weak. Ashes of Creation has no notable characters. The world isn't notable. The universe isn't really something that people care about. It doesn't have a story that sets it apart. People are invested in Ashes of Creation because of the sandbox nature of the game. That's great. But there's not a universe or an IP. It's not like World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls or SWTOR or Final Fantasy where it's like a universe people are immersed in and they care about. Now, some of you guys are going to say, oh, those are pre-existing IPs that have existed before the MMO came out. And yes, you are correct. But There are other games like WildStar that had a universe that set them apart, that had like Roused Hours and Chua and like these little things that just sort of made you go, oh, that's WildStar. And like people were immersed in that particular IP. Ashes of Creation doesn't have that. There's not like a thing that's like, oh, that's Ashes of Creation. Like, I don't know. It's just, it doesn't have that same feel. Hopefully I'm conveying this well. This game is more similar to like RuneScape, where like RuneScape doesn't really have like a thing. It's just kind of is. RuneScape is its own thing. It never really had a thing that brought you into it, but things happened that became sort of iconic with RuneScape, like the party hats, and like RuneScape obviously has its own little culture now. And I think that's where Ashes of Creation's launch point is going to be. It's going to be more similar to RuneScape than something like a Star Wars or a Warcraft or a Final Fantasy or a WildStar that's its own like big immersive universe. The next big weakness, and it's sort of related, is that the game's questing and general story are very, very weak. I love Ashes of Creation, but I couldn't tell you what's happening, why it happened, or what's going to happen. I don't know any of the characters in the game. Does the game even have notable characters or notable figures? Is there anything even going on? I don't know. Now, some of you guys might say, oh, well, you haven't really made an effort to like talk to quest NPCs and go seek out the story. I'm sure there are story elements in the game, but you can't just play the game. This is one of those things where it's like, show me, don't tell me. Like, I should be able to play the game and sort of get a vibe for what's going on. And again, in these other MMORPGs, even some of the bad MMOs, like you can sort of exist in the world and be like, okay, I sort of understand what's happening here. With Ashes, like, what is happening? I don't know from a story element. Again, people are engaged in Ashes because of the sandbox element, which is totally fine, but there is no like overarching story or like theme. You're just kind of there, which I don't know. Again, it's sort of like RuneScape where it's like, what's the theme of RuneScape? Is there one? I don't know. There's little mini stories, but yeah, Ashes doesn't really have anything going for it in that department either. Next thing is the game is just going to be grindy. This is not going to be an MMORPG where there's like little quests and smoke screens that make you think you're not grinding. This is not something that's a big deal to me personally. I don't mind the grind being very forward-facing and obvious. In fact, I think it's kind of insulting when MMORPGs try to smoke screen the grind with all these like various mechanics. Like a lot of MMORPG quests are just like disguising the grind with clicking on shiny things instead of killing mobs, or killing mobs and clicking on them, or it's a grind, but in a different way, and it's barely different. And once you've played these games long enough, you just see right through it. So I'm very okay with the game being grindy, but the game is absolutely going to be grindy, and that seems like it's just going to be the way the game is. So if that bothers you, then that's going to be ugly for you. Next thing I think is going to be difficult is I think it's going to be difficult for them to make compelling PvE content that lasts long term. This is an open world game, so how do you make PvE content that isn't cheesable under the current, hierarchy of how things are made? I have some ideas on how to make like actually challenging bosses that will work with the game in its open world non-instance nature. That's a video for a different time. But how do you make compelling PvE content long term that people don't just consume like locusts and never touch again? It's going to be difficult. Next thing, dynamic gridding is absolutely going to be sketchy when it first debuts to the public. Now, they are testing this on the PTR. I'm sure they're doing a ton of internal testing, and I'd love to be wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and dynamic gridding hits the live player environment on August 26th, and it works flawlessly, and I look like an idiot. I'm very okay with that. But I think it's very likely that this new technology is going to have some hiccups and some bugs when the masses start really testing it. So I think there's going to be a lot of weirdness that happens with the dynamic gridding, but I'd love to be wrong. And the final thing, for better or for worse, Ashes of Creation is going to be a slow burn MMORPG. This game is not going to have flashy content that you immediately just jump into, where it's like, this is the big ticket item and you can just jump right in and experience it with your flashy, new World of Warcraft quest line with voice act. Like, it's just not going to have that. This game is going to be, again, very similar to RuneScape, where it's like more of a slow burn kind of mentality. It's not like Final Fantasy where there's like a new expansion and the new story content. Like, I just don't think this is going to be one of those games with like that big ticket, low hanging fruit, I guess. So again, I think that's just going to be what it is. And again, phase 3 is going to be a very long phase, and I fully expect this to be the most transformative phase that Ashes of Creation goes through. This is where the most stuff is going to change because they're nailing down all of the system stuff, and they can finally start to focus on the core gameplay and content of the game. This phase is going to be cool. Like, it's going to be cool, and a lot is going to change in this next year. But I don't think miracles are going to happen. I don't think we're going to, all of a sudden, Ashes of Creation is now this, like, really crazy, cool IP that people identify with and can name all the characters. And I just don't think we're going to see that kind of stuff. I don't think we're going to see a lot of, like, cool story-driven content. We might see some. I do think the story arcs are going to be cool. But I don't think it's going to be on the same level as, like, a Final Fantasy or, like, a World of Warcraft that has, like, a lot of that kind of stuff. I think it's going to be a weaker point of the game, and I think the game just the way it's designed is going to have some weak points, and I think that's fine. But I think there's some serious strong points as well that I think people are really going to enjoy, and I'm all here for it. I can't wait to see how it plays out. I'm very excited to be playing an MMORPG again. I can't wait for phase 3.